I'm Duncan McLeod, and this is the TechCentral Show. TCS is brought to you by MTN Business. Visit mtnbusiness.co.za to learn more, and we thank them for partnering with the show and for helping bring you these great interviews. Now, my guest today is Bruce Mellado. Bruce is Professor of Physics at the University of Witwatersrand. He is a particle physicist, and he's been involved, spearheading even, a project to build a cost-effective air quality monitoring system based on sensors, Internet of Things technology, and artificial intelligence. It's called, I think it's pronounced AIR. Is that right? AI_R.
Correct.
Pronounced AIR. And Bruce recently published a very interesting piece on the conversation, which we republished here on Tech Central, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes, in which he wrote about the device and the project. Bruce, thanks for making the time, and welcome to Tech Central.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Before we talk about the project and the device you guys have built, I do think that you are the first particle physicist we've ever interviewed on the Tech Central Show. What are some of the exciting things that you're working on at the moment?
That's a very good question. So if you remember, the Higgs boson was discovered in July 2012.
Yes.
And the interest of particle physics has shifted after the discovery towards discovering new particles. So we just got an article published in the Nature portfolio, Nature Reviews Physics, where we review what we think are anomalies in the data that may point to new bosons. So that's what we've been working for almost 10 years, led by our team. And we have very strong signals of what we think may be new bosons in the data. And as such, we're publishing quite often about these exercises. We're preparing a new article for Nature, and so on and so forth. We're very excited about it.
What's the significance of it, of this potential discovery?
That's a very good question. So the Higgs boson was postulated and it was put forward by theorists in the 60s. Then what we know now as the standard model of particle physics was established in the 70s, and the Higgs boson is a part of that standard model. It took a long time to discover because it's an elusive particle that's difficult to detect. And as I said, it was discovered in 2012. So essentially what happens here is that for a number of reasons, and namely because it was difficult to detect, it was the last main prediction of the standard model, the last particle that hadn't been observed, that was observed in 2012. And that basically closes the standard model. But we know there's a lot of stuff out there that in nature that the standard model doesn't describe. And now that we have the Higgs boson, which is responsible for the generation of masses of known particles, we think that there will be other similar bosons that will help us understand most of the matter in the universe that we don't know anything about.
Okay.
Because we know there's a lot of matter in the universe that we can't touch or doesn't interact with particles of known matter, so to say. We know there's matter in the world and in nature that we simply don't know anything about.
So is the particle accelerator in Europe looking for these?
Correct. So the Large Hadron Collider continues to take data. There's a lot of data that continues to be delivered to the experiments. With that new data that came years after the Higgs boson was discovered, we believe there's signs of new bosons in the data. So that new boson could be the key to that new matter. That's what we're so excited about, and the significance would be as large as the Higgs boson itself.
Amazing. Yeah. I must keep an eye out on that story.
Absolutely.
I will do so. But let's talk about the AIR device and the project. First of all, how did a particle physicist get involved in a project like this?
That's a very good question, and the connection is almost direct. Because what particle physicists do, as you already alluded earlier, we have an accelerator. That's the Large Hadron Collider. The Large Hadron Collider provides protons that are going to collide head-on, but you need a detector to record those collisions. You can think of a detector as a very complicated camera that takes data 40 million times a second. So it's as if you are taking pictures 40 million times a second. So that basically generates this whole methodology of taking data, shipping data, and analyzing data, which is our bread and butter. And what air is, as you already alluded to, is a sensor made of communication, Internet of Things, that is fed into artificial intelligence, which is data analysis. So it basically comprises the same steps that we have to go through in particle physics to detect particles.
Interesting.
And as such, AI_R, is really a byproduct. We call a technology transfer activity of the South African participation at CERN. And it's a direct byproduct of it. In fact, it's developed in collaboration with the European lab CERN.
So nothing like this has been developed before?
Well, I believe that we are the first team in the world that has been able to integrate the three technologies, sensors, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence in a cost-effective way. That's for sure.
Okay.
Now, I'm not aware of other efforts globally that could entail much more expensive ways of doing it. I'm sure it's been tried, but in a cost-effective way, certainly is the first time that we are aware of.
How has air pollution in South Africa been measured up to now? Presumably much bigger measuring stations, much costlier.
Correct. So the conundrum of air quality monitoring revolves around cost of devices. Okay? So there's two big issues. First, the cost of devices, and second, in order to really understand the real impact of air quality, you have to develop dense networks of measurements. It doesn't cut it to put one or two devices somewhere in the city, because air quality is driven by hotspots, and that's a fundamental issue. You know, in order for us to really truly understand the impact on health, the impact on labor and labor efficiency, you really need to understand where and when those hotspots are located. So you need to at least place sensors every 500 meters in a city to really understand how poor or how well or how good the air quality is. Okay? So South Africa today the South African government, makes a big effort in measuring air quality. They have developed the SAQIS, the South African Air Quality Information System, which comprises about 130 stations, but these are very expensive. So everybody agrees, experts, government, agrees that the way to go is to use these existing expensive stations as calibrating and central nodes of networks or of more cost-effective sensors that would surround them, basically. You can think of the existing network and the existing infrastructure as the core of a much bigger network of sensors made of more cost-effective technology.
In telecommunications, they talk about mesh networks, where you've got devices that connect to each other rather than to a central server, and then the information is shared in that way and it becomes like a mesh infrastructure. Is it a similar concept with the air devices?
IoT in principle is flexible enough to accommodate several approaches and technologies, right? So the mesh network is one option. Now, the drawback of the mesh network is that all the sensors are participating in transmitting signals of other nodes. So that will basically take more energy, more power. And some of these devices will have to be running on batteries. So you can connect to the cellular network, for instance. Cellular network is ubiquitous in cities, even in the African continent. It's everywhere. And in principle, one node would talk to the cellular network or radio frequency type of communications, all right? That being said, there are advantages to mesh networks that we also take advantage of. We are not writing it off at all.
Interesting. Okay. So the trouble with these sensors in the past is that they've been too expensive. You've developed this solution. Who's developed it for you? Was the IP developed here in South Africa?
The integration is totally local, and the assembly and bringing together of other components, including artificial intelligence, is local. Now, when it comes to sensors, we have a partnership with a Swiss company, Sensirion, that has become a leader globally in the manufacturing of laser-based particulate matter measurements with cost-effective technologies. They are very well established globally, and they've basically demonstrated that their technology is both cost-effective and is accurate enough to establish poor air quality.
Okay.
That's very well known. And we've tested also in the South African conditions. We've tested and measured and benchmarked these devices against high-quality measurements from the SACI system. So that's the core technology for measuring air quality, which we didn't need to reinvent the wheel here. It wasn't certainly necessary there. Then we have Internet of Things protocols, which already exists, whether it is Wi-Fi or LTE or LoRa communications. We use all of them. And then everything has to be wrapped up through a cloud-based gathering of data with artificial intelligence algorithms, which we have developed in-house.
Okay. What does the AI do exactly?
AI can do many things. Depends on the question you're posing. But one of the things that...
so it's a generative AI solution that collects the data from these devices that you can then interrogate with prompts. Is that how it works?
That's one of the applications. I mean, generative AI is one of the brands of AI or types of AI within the machine learning ecosystem that we have. Now, one of the most important applications is the ability to predict. Okay? How is the air quality going to be tomorrow in a particular spot? So these are complex geotemporal systems that need predictions, both in space and time. And there are particular types of algorithms that we have mastered and developed our own combination of mathematics and algorithms that allow us to predict what's going to happen where.
Okay.
So the ability to predict is very, very important as well. So one of the goals that this exercise has is that we will have a government-sponsored app that everybody will download, and then you will be able to know what is the air quality where you are and where you're going to be 24 hours from now. So if it gets too bad, and if the level of particulate matter is too high, just wear a mask. And something as simple as that could save tremendous amount of cost to the healthcare system and labor place in general, because of the fact that when we breathe poor air quality, we become tired, we have headaches, and that has direct impact on our efficiency in our work.
I imagine the weather forecast must play a big role in...
The weather forecast is one of the inputs that the model uses. Of course, the probability of rain is very important, the direction of wind and all that, and we get that information from the South African weather system, in addition to other measurements that we make. And also satellite data play an important role. So that's also integrated into the data set in real time.
Okay. I've noticed just driving around Gauteng actually recently that particularly early in the morning you drive past townships in particular on cold winter mornings, and there's just this layer of smog over the houses. I imagine the burning of wood to keep people warm, coal as well, must be some of the biggest pollutants, certainly in the Gauteng region.
Yeah, most certainly burning is a huge concern of us. And we have to understand, we have to be realistic. Sometimes we have to burn, but do we have to burn all the time? Is there illegal burning? We have to really hone in on that question, because you're right. Combustion creates massive amounts of pollutants. Many of them are highly toxic. Depends on what you burn.
Especially plastic.
For instance. But there are other substances that can be burned, leading to very, very toxic and nasty chemicals and compounds that are very damaging to human health. But also traffic in general is also very, produces quite an amount of particulate matter. For instance, in the city of Johannesburg, you can clearly see the difference between day and night. And the peaks typically, at least in the areas we have measured, come right after the rush hour, especially in the evening. You actually reach the biggest peaks of poor air quality around that time.
Yeah.
So we need to manage that as well. And the population needs to know when and where the quality is poor that can affect their lifestyle and their health.
So is the idea with these devices that they are rolled out by the government, or is the idea that me as an ordinary consumer could buy one and put it in my house and become part of that network?
I would say both. That being said, because the implementation of artificial intelligence in mesh networks or networks of air quality is relatively new, it's been researched, and the proof of principle is there in the literature. We have also published papers. But now the issue is about implementation with large number of sensors. So we are going to a different level of proof of principle, which is no longer research. It's more R&D pertaining to the ability to sustain, maintain, and model in real time large number of sensors. So we've got funding from different sources, from the South African government, from the Canadian IDRC, and other sources. The Clean Air Fund, the UK-based Clean Air Fund, to roll out hundreds of those devices. So that will be the largest network rolled out in Africa, which, in addition, will be run and interpreted through artificial intelligence. So before government embarks, we work with government. We are technically part of SACIS, and we render data to SACIS as well. But government needs to see, and other stakeholders needs to see how these large networks work. So that proof of principle needs to be delivered. Because one thing is to say the devices or the individual device works well, but how do the networks work and deliver? How are they able to capture the real picture on the ground? That's a more complex question that requires rollout. I mean, the good news is that we now have procured funding to do so, and towards the end of the year, we will roll out at least 130 more sensors. Hopefully, there will be hundreds more coming in 25.
Can I buy one? Can I?
Sure, yeah.
How does one do that?
Well, you would have contact our technical team and place an order on the website, because what we do is we're basically going to launch production campaigns using South African industry. We have partnerships in South Africa for the production of PCBs and the population of the PCBs, and we take orders and we add it. We don't make a profit out of it. We are happy to see people willing to deploy devices elsewhere. We are really, it's very important that people realize that this is a collective responsibility. We really need to know where the air is bad. We cannot overstate or understate the problem, but the only way to do it is to really measure in a granular way. Yes. So we're very happy to, after the publication of and our TV interviews and all that, we've gotten a tremendous amount of requests, which we are trying to cope with.
Okay.
But the idea is that we are going to be launching the first production around October. So we are going to be accommodating those requests.
Okay.
And shipping it to people for people to deploy.
And what is the website address for people who want to learn more about it?
Is if you Google SACAQM, SACAQM, you will find it right away. SACAQM.org, I believe. Okay.
And if you own one of these devices, can you get access to the data that's on it yourself through some sort of app, or is there a screen on the device?
It's available through a web interface. So in principle, all the data is available. All the data of all the sensors that have been deployed. So far, we have deployed about 20 in schools in Soweto and Wits University, iThemba Labs, and the Netcare Hospital, Mill Park Hospital.
Oh, interesting.
And all that data can be downloaded.
All of it?
Yes.
Okay.
All of it, yes.
Okay. And I presume that you can actually take that data and then do some interesting graphical charting with it.
It's up to you. We provide basic analytic tools for people to look into their data and do comparisons and do basic analytics. We will also make the artificial intelligence, at least the output of it, public as well. When we have sufficient data to model on, that will also be a part of the graphical interface. Is
there a retail price on this yet, by the way?
So we are aiming at a production cost of about $100, taking into account the components that we need to bring about the quotes from local industry. So it should be around that. Of course, that is when we go into large, massive productions of tens of thousands. So when we produce hundreds, it will be somewhat more expensive.
Okay. And who has been involved in this project? Obviously Wits, but who else has been providing input and development?
It's an international consortium. First of all, it's important to recognize that these things have to be done by interdisciplinary teams. So we have not just physicists, but we have engineers, electrical engineers, data scientists, public health specialists, doctors. So we have, in South Africa, we have colleagues from the UCT, from the University of Pretoria, of course, Wits University, iThemba Labs. We have colleagues in Europe. We have colleagues in the States, in Canada. So it's fairly, I would say, if we tried to acquire a 360-degree view of the problem. Now, we recognize that the problem of air quality monitoring is mostly of systems engineering, but you cannot just design a system being just a pure technologist without talking to public health specialists and environmental experts and so on and so forth. So we have as such a fairly diverse team of folks, including community engagements. Last but not least, because you need to talk to the community. We have experts in community engagements because this is a very serious problem at the community level.
And from the devices that you've deployed in the field so far, have you come across some findings that you perhaps weren't expecting?
Well, first of all, we didn't really know what we were expecting because we haven't really measured in this area with such a level of granularity. What we have learned is that whenever somebody burns something, the spikes are tremendous. So it really goes beyond hazardous very quickly. And these devices are able to pick it up very, very quickly, which led us to think, well, this could also be used to alert government and other stakeholders that something is being burned. And I mean, that obviously we are learning as, you're always learning as a scientist, every day. But I was actually quite surprised by how strong those spikes are when something is burned or something burns in the neighborhood. It's really massive. So that really, begs the question, how unhealthy is to braai?
To braai?
It's actually a mundane question. But
don't tell South Africans this.
I know. I would be lynched. But there's a reality. When combustion happens close by, the diffusion of particles basically permeates almost everything around the source, and then you basically get exposed to very high concentrations. And when I say high, I'm talking about way, way above the level of hazardous concentrations. I'm not talking about just about. Okay, so that's something that surprised us a little bit.
Interesting. I mean, we often think of pollution, we think of chimney stacks and big industry and Eskom coal-fired power plants out on the Mpumalanga Highveld. But a lot of the pollution we actually see in Johannesburg, and I think this is the pollution that's actually getting worse, is local.
Yes.
Vagrants burning the plastic of copper cables down by the local river, or a braai, or whatever it happens to be, as someone burning something they shouldn't be burning in their backyard.
Right.
Do you think that's actually the bigger problem than industrial pollution?
Well, we are trying to get a comprehensive picture as we roll out, and we will also roll out in the Highveld. Okay, and we're not downplaying any source. We are now, as we are deploying a large number of sensors, we're going to get the opportunity to probe the different sources and the role that each source plays in generating large concentrations of particulate matter. So at this point in time, we don't want to rush into conclusions. We want to be evidence-based before we conclude anything. And at this point in time, so far, based on what we have learned, burning creates very big spikes. And in Johannesburg, traffic plays a big role. Okay, that's what we know now, based on the limited number of devices that we have rolled out. Now, have we acquired a comprehensive picture? Not yet. We are basically getting there. Within the next 12 months or so, we will have hundreds of systems deployed, including in the Highveld and similar areas where we're going to start probing the different sources. And in fact, one of the key questions that one has to address when you deal with the complexity of air quality is the sources. Where are the sources? where are they located? How does diffusion work? Where is the cloud moving from and to? Mm-hmm. And unless you measure and have this AI that will allow you to create this complex geotemporal picture, mm-hmm. you can only guess.
A big problem certainly on the eastern side of South Africa during winter is veld fires.
Yes.
I imagine that's also has a huge impact on
Yes.
these readings and on the pollution that people are breathing in.
And we have to measure everything to really truly understand, because the problem with air quality is that on the one hand, environmental analysis, chemical analysis, the science of air quality is very well understood. It's very advanced. There is massive amount of articles. There's a massive body of literature on the subject. Scientists understand air quality very well, but on the other hand, it's not monitored. So how can you connect that knowledge with remedial action? Is only through actual measurement that you can say, this is bad, but how bad is it is the key question you have to address. And how do the clouds move, and where do they go, and how long does a fire last in terms of its damaging action on people and animals and whatnot. All those things need to be measured in order for us to really prioritize what are the most important remedial action and steps that need to be taken to alleviate the problem. And it's a very complex problem. We know it's bad, yes, no questions asked, but we don't really know in the South African context how bad it is or how good it is. Sometimes you can have, surprisingly enough, cold spots nearby a source of pollution. Okay? But you need to know where the cloud is going to really identify the spots and the areas that will be severely affected. Unless you measure, it's very difficult to model from first principles. Very, very difficult.
Do you imagine that eventually South African or Johannesburg residents, or any resident of any city in this country, for example, would be able to access a visual resource online where they can actually see a map of where the pollution hotspots are across the city?
Absolutely. And I think it's within our reach within the next 3 years. Okay. I'm sure we will have that, at least in Johannesburg. We're working very hard with the City of Johannesburg, Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Science and Innovation, the DFFA as well, to make that happen, to create a large pilot for that to take place. And in fact, that's exactly what we need. We need a heat map of air quality, but not only what's going on today, what's going to happen tomorrow, so that you're prepared.
So you can do the forecast.
You can do forecast together with the weather forecast.
Right. Okay, so even on the evening news, when they've got the charts up, you could say, here's what the pollution situation is going to be like in Johannesburg tomorrow.
Exactly. Ideally, yes. Although you will certainly need something like a map that you will need to zoom into. So it's going to be difficult to say the quality of air in Johannesburg will be such and such.
Right. Because it's very localized.
Because it's very, very localized. But at least users that have access to the internet and have access to the app will certainly be able to have an educated guess of how bad it's going to be, where they're going to go tomorrow.
There's some very good websites out there, actually. I think one is called Earth. One is called Venture Sky. I don't know if you've come across these websites.
Yeah.
They provide, on a global scale, details about particular matter in the atmosphere, and you can often correlate it to large fires. For example, when those huge fires were happening in Canada earlier this year, you go onto one of those websites, you could see the scale of the particulate matter in the atmosphere. I'm guessing that the quality of that data, though, when you zoom right into city level and down to suburb level, is probably not that accurate.
Okay, so let me backtrack a little bit. In principle, you can get macro events such as big burning or fires, even through satellite data.
Yes.
Okay. There's no question about that. So, but the thing is that that's a catastrophic event.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen every day. What you really want to monitor is all these micro sources of poor air quality and pollutants that are put in the air on a regular basis, and how those create spikes, together with burning of materials here and there. Yeah. So that's what really we are exposed for the most part to, is all this aggregated ensemble of small sources. Okay, and for that you need measurements on the ground.
Yeah.
Certainly, satellite data is not there yet. to provide that kind of information.
And the idea, I presume, is well down the line, and a lot of this eventually is going to come down to enforcement and whether the data you're collecting is actually being acted upon.
Right.
So I guess that ideally in the future, this data would be at the hands of environmental law enforcement officers who would see that there's a problem in a particular suburb, go there,
right,
and find out what it was and put a stop to it.
Yeah, and that certainly is one of the things that policymakers should do and with that data. And in fact, they're willing to do it. It's just that the system doesn't exist.
Right.
Because right now what we have is a market with a bunch of offerings that are certainly not affordable, not even to the global north, okay, let alone the global south. But I know that, and now that we are learning a lot about the ecosystem, that municipalities, provinces, Department of Health do have air quality officers that worry about what's going on. It's just that they find themselves in a quandary. We can't afford to buy these complex, expensive systems from abroad. Nobody can afford it. So as such, the Department of Science and Innovation that funds our research has partnered with other stakeholders to say, well, we have the knowledge through our research at the European Lab CERN, what particle physicists do to provide cost-effective solutions and give us a chance to roll out thousands, tens of thousands of systems, which would be affordable. Certainly the cost would be far offset by the benefits.
Yeah, I was going to ask ideally how many of these devices you'd need to deploy across a city the size of Johannesburg.
Right. I mean, that's a very difficult question because you really have to pinpoint the hot spots. You need to worry about safety, vandalism. So you really have to locate sensors strategically.
Do they have to be outside?
Ideally, yes, because the moment you are inside, there's some filtering that happens.
Right.
And then you don't get the real picture of what's going on the ground. But I mean, the city of Johannesburg would need probably thousands. Okay. How many, that needs to be fine-tuned. But certainly it is in the thousands. Okay. It's not in the millions.
Sure.
It's really thousands would be a reasonable number to start getting a reasonably accurate grid of information.
Okay. And who should pay for it? Should it be the local city council or should it be the Department of the Environment? Where should the funding be coming from?
Well, I will leave that to policymakers.
To the politicians.
It's very complicated. That's not within our purview. Our job is to basically provide that indigenous solution that is affordable to the cities and government.
Okay. Now, we all know that the cost of technology comes down if you start to produce it at scale. Yeah. Do you see an opportunity to take this innovation that you've developed here and export it in some way into other markets around the world?
We are currently working to take this technology to other countries in Africa through the networks that the Canadian IDRC has generated and funds. So we're now currently talking to Ghana, to Cameroon, to Morocco, and the network is growing very fast because, I mean, what's the point of reinventing the wheel if you have already a cost-effective solution? And since we're not doing this for profit, people can take that technology and other governments can actually also profit from it. And that's certainly part of the conversation that we're having.
Okay. Yeah. Is there a way to you say this is not done for profit, but is there a way potentially to commercialize it?
I think there is. I think there are major opportunities, and I think the private sector could profit from it greatly as well. And ideally, it would be great if we had everyone contributing to it, because businesses also suffer from poor air quality in a very, very significant way. In a direct way, I wouldn't say indirect, in a direct way as well. Even the fact that labor productivity, there's been measurements about what is the loss of labor productivity due to the increase of the concentration of particulate matter by 10 units or 15 units. So imagine if you are close to fires. So you are affected as well. Why are people tired? Why do people have headaches? So ideally, I would love to see the private sector also get involved in this conversation.
Yeah. Excellent initiative. I can't wait for them to go on sale because I'm going to get one myself. I've noticed a smell of plastic in the air in my neighborhood in the last the year or so, and I think it's vagrants burning cables or something in the nearby park, and it would be very useful to know exactly what I'm breathing. I'm sure there are many other South Africans who feel exactly the same way. Bruce Mellado is Professor of Physics at the University of the Witwatersrand. Thank you so much for coming into the TechCentral studio today and sharing this fascinating story with our audience.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.